Which is what we're going to talk about, is learning.
Welcome to the Big Picture Podcast. I am John Suchocki here with co-host Tracy Suchocki. Tracy?
Hey.
We are here with Professors Linda and Peter Jeschofnig, founders of Hands-On Lab, a company that grew from an environment-friendly microscale chemistry kit. The two of them developed for Peter's chemistry course way back in the early 1990s. Yes. Today, Hands-On Lab, also known as HOL, produces over 250 varieties of science lab kits spanning 11 science disciplines. These kits are now used by colleges and universities across the nation. Linda and Peter, thank you so much for joining us here at the Big Picture Podcast. Welcome.
You're welcome.
Linda and Peter, could either one of you describe the story of HOL briefly, how it got started?
I think I should start how the first kit was developed. Having the first kit basically gave rise to the company. So the kit was formed because I was teaching at Colorado Mountain College. The school came to me and said, Peter, would you be willing to teach one of those telecourses? For example, lectures were streamed like at 2 o'clock in the morning, and students recorded them, and then at their convenience, they would listen to a video. And I was asked if I would teach one of those classes, and I said only if we can combine with a lab. I don't believe teaching a lecture course only without having any lab. And the school said, well, develop something. So I had already done a little bit along those lines because we lived in Leadville. And in the winter, sometimes over the past, the students couldn't make it to class.
Leadville, Colorado. At 11,000 feet elevation, people just couldn't get to school.
And so I had developed a number of labs, experiments that students could do at home because they had to miss the formal lab on campus. Mm-hmm. And so I was already in the right frame of mind, and I had personally been very interested in small-scale or micro-scale chemistry. So I felt there was a really good way to do chemistry experimentation.
What do you mean by microscale chemistry?
Basically, small-scale or microscale chemistry is where you do the same experiments that you'd have done in the past, but instead of using test tubes and beakers full of materials, you're using drops of material. You're doing the same experiment, but you're using much, much, much smaller quantities. And of course, the advantage is the safety factor, cheaper to buy supplies, less problem of disposal with waste disposal, et cetera, et cetera. So, and the first lab kit was supposed to be enabling students to do the lab component for their telecourses.
Linda?
Well, usually the background stories between husbands and wives are different. And my background story goes back further, really. Peter and I were involved in experiential education, a lot of workshops and things through experiential education in the 80s and also in the 90s. But he became an expert in microscale chemistry. And then he taught high school teachers how to utilize small scale in their classrooms, in their class labs, again, to effectuate the incredible savings in the cost of chemicals, but mostly the safety and environmental disposal factors. And we were doing lots of workshops and things on experiential education because we are such advocates of experiential learning. The way you learn science is really by doing science.
Okay,
you get that full body learning that you need.
Experiential.
Yes.
Meaning, back to what Peter had said earlier, that you simply did not want to teach a science course without a lab component. The idea being there to learn science, you've got to do science. You've got to experience the science, ergo lab activities.
Sure.
And seeing not everything's always going to go perfect either. It really, truly the experience of failure, experience of success that goes behind being there and doing it.
Yes. People can tell you, this is what to accept. But when you are there firsthand, you're making a firsthand observation. You see things in front of your eyes. You own that material. It's not someone giving you information. It's something that you own because you have experienced it yourself. And so that's real knowledge.
That was put very well.
Thank you.
And to follow up on the experiential component, I was a firm believer of doing this in all my classes. Instead of just, for example, having a laboratory where the students do a canned experiment, you actually use hands-on experience. For example, I was teaching a course in water chemistry. I actually had the students go out and monitor a segment of the stream and doing chemical testing maybe every 2 weeks, and then see the chemical changes of their river over the whole semester, and which is to me much more useful than just doing a follow step-by-step experiment. I tried to change many of my chemistry experiments, not just do this and do this, but actually put them into a case scenario, like a case study. We're trying to solve the following problem. How will we go about doing this chemically? And also, in many cases, when I was teaching face-to-face classes, I would have a short discussion session with the students before we actually start the experiment, discussing how will we solve the problem at hand, how will we solve it. And then students would come with different ideas, and we would have different groups trying to test their ideas for how to get a result to the question.
You're distinguishing here between being a person who disseminates information, just delivering content, versus being an instructor who's helping the students to learn.
And understand why they're doing something.
Facilitating their self-discovery is what we're trying to do.
And that gets back to where you're talking about the experiential, yeah.
We wanted to talk about how people learn. We know that people learn through reinforcement and repetition. If things are really relevant to us, then they, of course, make a deeper impact. But the whole thing about experiential learning is making the information relevant and doing something physical. There are connections between our tactile experiences and our mental experiences. I even had experiential assignments in my accounting and economics classes. I would have my accounting students would do a project that was relevant to them, to where they would start a business on paper, and we would take it throughout the full semester, applying everything, and hopefully it was a business that they wanted to be in or their family was related to. So it was really relevant because, of course, the more relevant you can make the material to the student, the more they want to learn it and the longer they'll retain the material.
They're going to enjoy the course a lot more.
Yeah,
I
let's
think
be fun.
There's still an attitude among students that they come into college from high school that they're expected to sit down and listen and absorb information as though the instructor's downloading information to them. My experience is when I flip the classroom is that students complain, holy heck, what are you doing? I'm paying you to teach me. You're making me learn all by myself. How dare you?
Yes.
And it's important that they recognize that, hey, you are responsible for your own learning. We can lay it out there for you. We can show you ways that you can make it more relevant.
And the secret sauce to bringing it to that direction is to present curriculum to them that's engaging.
Yes.
That means going out to the Arkansas River and measuring O2 levels.
Exactly.
Or having a business, having students develop a business plan for a business they might actually start after college. So college being not the end all, but very much a beginning.
Far cry from the old days where you would go to a lecture and the professor would speak for 50 minutes and that you write it down and then you trying to remember as much as you can in anticipation of the next test.
But that's still out there.
It is still out there,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah. Key here is with labs. It seems to be something all science professors could agree upon, that to learn the science, you need to be doing the science.
Well, as a matter of fact, that was the reason that science courses were the last ones to be offered as online courses because schools did not know how we're going to handle the lab component.
Yeah.
Now, there were a few creative instructors out there. They basically developed something very similar to what we did.
With kitchen chemistry.
Kitchen chemistry type laboratories that got the students to do things. They may have been a little simpler than the experiments they would have done on campus, but at least they did something. Then, of course, some others said, well, we can't do labs, so let's do simulations.
Like computer simulations?
Computer simulations.
Yeah.
But they found they're just not effective.
It's a video game.
It's a video game. It's something else that just passes before your eyes and doesn't create the deep learning I think one of the real successes of our lab kits, and we did have quantitative data showing students using our kits at home were outperforming those doing their labs on campus. But that makes sense because you have to figure it out. You have to set it up, perform it, clean it up. There's no one to tell you what to expect. It's a true discovery learning experience, and you are physically, tactily involved, and there are just more learning points that your body is, in your mind, you're connecting to this material that will help you to understand it.
What I'm hearing, not just that you're pulling in a lab component, but that you are really making it relevant to experiential learning. You're not trying to just download information, but that you're considering these people, your students, as people that come in with intelligence and curiosity, rather than giving a pre-canned kit that has an answer already. You guys have created a way of actually discovering for themselves what happens when you do different things. Yeah. It's subtle, but it's really profound. I mean, I've watched students be really disgusted and bored with being told to go through these steps to get to that end answer.
Now, there was one other phase in our development that was very useful. Colorado Mountain College went over to video-based courses, where basically the students were in a...
you mean television?
In a television studio, and the instructor was in the television studio on a different campus, and so the students were in different locations in different studios, and they would do the experiments, and I could actually watch them do the experiments.
Being spread out over 12,000 square miles among its 14 campuses, Colorado Mountain College has long been involved in distance education to provide access to education to those people way up in the mountains that it's hard to get. What Peter was talking about, the interactive television experience would be, I guess, equivalent to today's Skype conference call, okay? Because we could see our students whether we were in Leadville or Glenwood and they were in Aspen or Salida or wherever. They could see us. We had special cameras. We could show them illustrations. Peter could perform experiments. They could see, and he could see them when they did that too. And that was the testing proving ground for our lab kids, that doing a lab that he supervised the labs while they were doing them on the interactive television. And from that, we knew that these people can do this. They do not need supervision. They can actually perform these experiments on their own.
Which has benefits in itself.
Yes,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Make mistakes. Get messy.
Oh yeah, got to make
Miss
mistakes.
Frizzle,
That's
yeah.
how you learn. Whoops. But I think one of the things, when you do these experiments yourself, you see what a huge difference small errors can make in the importance of accurate measurements. A lot of little life lessons come to the fore when you're actually perforing science experimentation.
I know this is a podcast series, but here's the box. I want to open it up and see what toys are in it.
Well, let's see. You have a physics kit there, I believe.
Yeah, we got a physics kit. And listeners, we are opening up the cardboard box now. Tracy, what are you seeing here?
Ooh, screens, blocks, washers.
That's a timer, I think. You need an electronic timer for...
It's a timer. Yeah. There's a balance.
Yes, very
pulleys,
important.
balances, spring balance, yes.
Looking at a spring balance, it's 5 Newton, a 5 Newton spring balance.
A string.
Oh, yeah,
4
so you
meters
can
of
make
string with a weight.
Right, so you can make a string bob.
A pendulum.
Right.
Pendulum.
This is a plastic
Graduated
cylinder.
cylinders.
Yeah. It's not going to break on you.
A single bolt.
Yeah, so this is like, I'd call it a curiosity stimulator.
Yeah.
Then there are the instructions of what to do with this stuff.
There's a separate lab manual. No, there's
Right.
a lab manual that probably did not come in the box. It was
Because
probably
this is
separate.
online. When we started out, we had printed lab manuals, and then we eventually, of course, we did DVDs as we continued to enrich our materials, add explanatory videos, and we eventually developed our own proprietary software that integrated with the school learning systems. Most of the colleges have, whether it was Blackboard, and there's so many desire to learn different systems today. Yeah. That are learning platforms that the instructors use. And our materials would integrate with that for the instructor. So it was giving the instructor feedback on how the student was doing.
Would they take a picture of themselves?
Selfie, absolutely.
And upload that?
One of the things people are always concerned about, well, how do you know that they've done the work? How do you know anyone's done the work? But yes, we would ask the students to submit a photo of themselves and their lab setup along with their lab reports. So, and something with today's date on it. So you could have confidence that the student had actually done the work. Our focus is really always on the student. How would I feel like if I'm the student? And that was like everything from customer service to the warehouse. If you were the student and you had this problem, what would you want us to do? And that's what we should do.
So the labs provide experiential learning, especially for the online learner, but also it's a tool perhaps for on-campus.
Oh, yes.
As well.
We did have several institutions. Their laboratory space is so expensive.
If you have like 400 students in your classroom and it's a lab course, say for engineers, you're going to need lab space for 400 students.
Then that becomes a bottleneck for the institution. They cannot offer enough science courses because they don't have enough laboratory space. So many institutions have on-campus lecture and have students utilize our lab kits for their and do their labs at home.
As a counterpart, I've even met institutions that had the students do the labs on campus, but the school provided the kit because it was cheaper to do it that way than set up a new science lab.
True. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And then basically two students were sharing a kit, and they were doing some experiments at school, and some they could do at home.
Yeah. We found a lot of students would write to us that it was their science. They were scared to death of science. They had put off getting their degrees, and that utilizing our kit made science fun and interesting to them. Well, of course, the letters I really liked were letters from women who were working mothers, had very little opportunity to finish their degrees and advance their careers, but online learning made that possible for them.
So there's increased accessibility.
Oh yes, and especially women, which are, 65, 70% of the users of our lab kits. And I think, again, it's because they have so many other domestic responsibilities that being able to take courses online is the only option for a lot of these women. But, wonderful letters. I finally finished my degree because I get my science. Then the one letter that it still gives me goosebumps, though, was a woman wrote to us thanking us for developing these kits because she'd always wanted to be a nurse and was never able to finish her sciences to get her nursing degree. And so she said, but not only did you allow me to finally get my nursing degree, you gave me back my 14-year-old son. And her son had been involved with drugs and the wrong people. But she said he saw me in the evenings doing my science labs on the kitchen table, and it gave us a safe topic of conversation. And he became so interested in it. Now he wants to be an EMT, and and it's the first motivation I've seen out of him. So that made us really proud that we had a lot of stories where families were doing science together, or then utilizing the leftover materials, the weights, the microscopes, and doing their own family science. Our real bottom line objective is science literacy. Science literacy in this country is appalling, and it's sad. It's really sad how little people understand about our world and the way it works. And if we're going to be effective at anything, we do have to have a greater level of science literacy in our country to move forward.
Agreed. Could we talk a little bit more about the development of the business itself?
Okay, let me start something. Because I was the scientist in the family, I wanted to produce a tool to help my students fulfill their requirements.
Okay.
I basically produced enough lab kits, and they were sold through our bookstore. And then a few professors came in and said, could we use them too? And so it expanded a little bit. But that was all I was interested in as a scientist, to basically be a service to my students. And there comes my wife, the business professor.
Well,
and I
remember,
let her take over.
Yes, Peter's the scientist in the family, and I'm the science acolyte, okay? But yes, I taught primarily accounting, economics, and business subjects. And we did this when we started it. We really did start it for the college and for our students. And that was the focus on making these experiments fun and effective, where students wanted to do them. And only after we had that tied down, we were very active in the academic community back in the 90s and early 2000s. It kind of grew by word of mouth because these kits were very effective. And people were coming to me, oh, gosh, your chemistry kit's so great. Why don't you do biology? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? The big problem was insurance.
Insurance.
Insurance is a small business protecting yourself. Finding an insurance agent when you say students chemistry home in the same sentence that, doesn't have a heart attack. And so we talked to a bunch of attorneys, and we tried to cover ourselves with paper for liability protection. The student has to accept responsibility for reading the lab manual, performing all this.
Glasses.
That's right, and following that. And then I got lucky. I ran into an insurance agent one day who'd actually been a chemistry instructor. And when I told him the basis of this is microscale chemistry, and it's almost impossible to hurt yourself with microscale, okay? And he said, microscale? Oh, hey, that's easy. Yeah, I can write you a liability policy. So it was only in the late 90s when I was actually able to seriously look at making it into a real business servicing other people, because we could get liability insurance. There's no way I would have started a business that I couldn't provide liability insurance.
So you had people
to.
coming up to you asking, can you create a kit for biology? Can you create a kit for this? Mm-hmm. Was there a moment where this little light went off in your head that, wait a second, this could be a business?
Well, actually, yeah, for a couple of years. We developed the first kit, I think that chemistry quit in 93, 94, and we're just working on developing it and then selling it through CMC, I think, through 2006 and 7. And that's
to Colorado Mountain College campuses.
To CMC campuses only, and people were coming to us. And I was, at that point, when we saw that they were very effective, then I started looking as to how I could make a real business out of it.
And the liability thing came
Right, the
up
liability
first.
was a huge thing.
I have a little side story. Teaching at Colorado Mountain College, we needed permission from our board about to actually use those kits in Colorado Mountain College courses. And so basically I invited a board meeting, and the different board members were in different campuses. They went to their computer room, and they all got a lab kit. And I talked them through performing a lab. At the end of the session, we had a unanimous approval to offer those lab courses.
Awesome. Well, this was, remember also that back in the 90s, when people were still very skeptical about online education and what you can and can't do. So there was there was no better way to do this using interactive video, and they had fun. They had a lot of fun, and it really, I think, that reinforced the value of online and distance education for all those board members, to where they were even more supportive.
But then for other colleges to accept a kit like that?
That was basically up to the other campuses, and we had no problem doing that. I mean, typically we went through professors. We convinced the professor that this was something to consider for his classes. And so that model has changed, and Linda can discuss it a little better, how the model has changed.
You're talking about marketing for this.
Well, to make sure that other campuses how other campuses felt they could accept that innovative technique. technology.
Right.
Yeah.
At that time, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was still a lot of questions, the acceptability of online courses. And only now we know that how online courses can be even more effective. And what we're talking about, this, owning your learning experience and that kind of thing. But there was still a lot of skepticism. And we were thinking about making it into a business, the necessity. I felt it was forced on me to make this into a business for CMC, and then other people having interest. What I did was I worked with other people that were also ahead of the pack in innovation in trying to develop experiments for their courses in the biological sciences. I helped Peter with the development of the first 2 chemistry kits for the Chem 1 and 2, and also the physics kits. But for biology, microbiology, anatomy and physiology, what else? Environmental, forensics. We pulled in other instructors who were...
A humorous event. We finished writing the Physics 2 lab manual in Fiji.
Right, yeah. Well, we'd had a Fulbright professorship in Namibia. And, working on physics too.
Africa.
Namibia, yes. Right, in southern Africa. It's on the Atlantic coast.
Desert.
Yeah, right. Northwest of South Africa. Yeah. And remember, I'm not the scientist, but I think one of the real advantages that I brought to the business was not being a scientist, but being enthusiastic, because I had to figure out how these things worked to convert his, long, convoluted Germanic sentences into comprehensible prose. Right. I even took his chemistry course, to write the chemistry manual, and then I would do all the experiments. And as a student, a neophyte student, what I didn't understand, those were things that I could work on emphasizing more. And that was a lot of fun. So I had physics too. Oh my God, I had circuits spread out all over the living room and putting that thing together, and finally had all the edits. But I needed him to sit down and go through them. Okay, couldn't get this guy, so I took him to Fiji, and I locked him in the hotel room. Except I said, when you're finished with editing this, you can get out. So
because these are the manuals that go with the labs, the directions.
That's right. There were all to make sure that I hadn't made any mistakes.
That's the other half of the equation. First part is you get the stuff, and there. Second part, how do you work with that stuff in a meaningful way? That's
right.
Engaging as well.
And Peter really solid on the science, and I'm a good writer. Can put words together to where the instructions are reasonably clear. We've gotten a lot of really good feedback on how well the manuals are written. So
you're making the kits, you're making the manuals. Like I'm envisioning in your living room. Right.
Initially, that's why we started. Yes, that's correct.
I ran it out of my garage until the early 2000s.
And then eventually you had to hire somebody.
What I do in the summer at that time when we were just doing primarily chemistry, one of Peter's students to help me, and we'd mix up chemicals, write molarity, and then. Believe me, sucking and sealing and labeling those little pipettes is a really tedious job. And the average lab kit has over 120 components in it. And some are like over 200
And we started out with more chemicals than that. And we decided we had to
I think we have like about 80 chemicals in there now. But at one time we had like over 100 chemicals in there. But other things that we did were... consolidating, moving from if we had hydrochloric acid in 6 experiments, we would have like a 1 ounce bottle instead of 6 5 mil tubes of it.
This sounds very labor intensive.
It was extremely labor intensive, and figuring exactly how to do that because you have to put it together precisely. Again, our focus is always on the student. I think, the last thing I want to be is working on my science experiment at 11 o'clock at night and missing something. I'd be so ticked off. So, always focusing on what the student needs and making sure they had it there timely.
Quality.
That was hard.
Quality assurance was very, very important because everything, the concentrations had to be right.
Yeah, 3 molar, 3.2 molar.
Oh, that's right. The experiment doesn't work right if you don't have it right. after 2005, found Rocky Mountain Reagents, RMR, a local chemical company, which I especially like. It's owned by two women, a mother-daughter. The mother is the biologist, the daughter is the chemist, and they're out in Golden now. We worked with them, and we continue to work with them today. They still produce the pipettes of chemicals and things like that for us. But then I moved the operation to Denver, and I moved to Denver. Peter continued to live in Glenwood. He was teaching. Yeah, it was about time. Once you get over about $1 million in sales, it was time for us to start taking over our own assembly. The first 5 years of the formality of the business, which I incorporated and started doing as HOL Science on January 1st, 2000. So that was the formalization of the business. I had insurance. I was ready to rock and roll. And, we were filling orders, but we were not really engaged in any marketing or sales because we were still developing new product. And it was only after I moved to Denver and hired my first sales guy in 2007 that we started to focus on real marketing.
Wow, your hands were full.
Yeah, but it was fun. It was a really exciting time. Here now I'm retired and I'm bored. What am I saying? Well, when you work like 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, but you love it because
passion.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was a lot of work and I was learning so many new things, at the same time. And
the science and the business.
The science and the business. So, yes, it was a lot of fun. And, did not really... Okay, first employees we hired in 2007. And then it was one of the things we always said, the thing about being educators and business owners is that it allowed us to live our values. And so that's paying fair wages, providing good benefits has always been a value of ours. So that was also very important then to how am I going to provide decent health insurance to my employees, which I did by joining a PEO, which is a partnership employee organization. Uh-huh. Instead of, like me at that time, I had maybe 7 to 10 employees, could not get a good deal on insurance. But a PEO combines your small company with lots of other small companies. They are, in effect, the employers, and through them you could get group policy insurance, and you could get, the AFLAC and all the other benefits that people would need in a good job. And so that's how we provided that to
I like
them.
what you said there about being able to live your values.
Yeah. So there's always a conflict between making money and living our values, but you know what? You can do both.
You did.
Yes,
We
you
did. We did.
You answered a question I had was, what kept you going during challenging times?
Alcohol.
They were all challenging times.
Can you edit that?
The passion.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
And there was always something to do.
Well,
And
we had another benefit is from very early in my teaching career, I've been very active on the state level with faculty. Mm-hmm. So I've been on several statewide faculty boards. And so basically most faculty members in chemistry knew about our kids.
What was going on anyway?
And then CCC Online, Colorado Community Colleges Online, started forming and offering online courses in conjunction with different colleges.
That was huge.
And I was very much involved.
That was 2010?
No. We were talking about 1998, 99. This is when, CCC Online, Colorado Colleges Online, they were one of the very first, and they were actually the leaders in how to set up online programs with all of the way that they approached it, because this was the very beginning of online education. And the fact that we were working together on making sure our materials were meeting the learning objectives. Yeah. And we were working with a group of people that also were actively passionate about and promoting distance online education. I think that was huge because it helped us and it helped them in structuring our courses to where they'd be more effective for students.
You came from it from within.
Yeah.
You were part of that body.
Yes.
You had the credential, the know-how, the creativity. So for any business students listening to this podcast, you're talking about networking.
Yes.
You had a
yes,
network
we are.
that was in place.
What were some of your other favorite lab experiments?
Well,
that you
it's
came up
interesting
with?
because some near to the, when the company was doing really well, my job was basically coming up with new ideas, developing new interesting ideas, and I was and I had a team. I wasn't doing it all by myself. We had a research team. We came up with so many new ideas that the salespeople said, "Oh no, enough. We have enough experiments. We don't need any more." But some experiments that I really loved that we never actually implemented was measuring the magnetic field of the Earth at your location and stuff like this. I mean, those were experiments that I was really excited about. And then another one that was actually there's something where business and science diverged. We developed a super forensic science kit.
Oh.
And it was not a bestseller. It was not a good seller. The reason is because a lot of schools offered forensic science as a non-lab course.
But it was such a great kit. Listen, it'd be a fun kit just for a hobbyist. The guy, we did this kit with Richard Tooze, who is one of the foremost forensic scientists. The government hired him to go to Afghanistan and investigate a bunch of things. But each lab starts with a real story, a real case setting. And somehow or another that the case was solved, the experiment that you're about to do relate, whether it's glass breakage, blood spatter, whatever, was based on that particular experiment. And so it's a lot of fun. And we developed it just before we sold the business, but I always thought that we should really try to sell it as a hobbyist kit because it's just so much fun.
Or a family game.
A family game.
Well,
Right.
and there's one other factor. I mean, as an online student, you do your experiments and hopefully they're challenging and fun, but that's it. And I wanted to have another avenue to get my students. And so I encouraged them and I shared with them avenues to become a citizen scientist and make them aware of citizen science project they could do. Okay, this is still my sales pitch today is if you're an online student and you have no way of doing a school project or something like this, have your instructor make you aware of what are your interests, what's your number one interest in science, and we find a project for you to participate in. So
Can you just say briefly how somebody would go about finding projects, the citizen scientist projects?
Google citizen
Google
science.
citizen science and your area you're interested in, what field, astronomy, biology,
Bird watching.
whatever you're interested in, there is something. For example, there's one project, some of projects were basically not so involved, basically analyzing photographs, for example, deep space, and you taking a course as to what different things could be, and then you analyze a photograph and saying, I found this and this and this and this. There was one project they were looking for Genghis Khan's tomb. And you got a whole bunch of photographs from Mongolian desert areas, and you were trying to identify satellite photos,
Yeah,
and you were trying
ground
to identify potential structures that then scientists could go and test, and saying, but there's so many things from bird watching to just observing what's happening in your backyard. I mean, there's so much potential there, and it's amazing as to how many discoveries in science is actually being made by citizen
Discover an
scientists.
asteroid, a comet.
Yeah. Right.
Things like that.
Well,
Or just long-term, smaller experiments like watching weather change and bird migratory change.
Well, for
Or
example,
bees.
if you have a little extra money, like $250, you could put an air quality analyzer in your backyard and basically feeds into the state network of air quality. And I mean, there isn't
Sort
an
of
awful
like
lot.
weather
You just
stations.
monitor it and you share your results. I mean, there's so much that can be done.
So Google or go online and search for citizen science.
Yeah,
Citizen science.
Right, and you will find list, by numerous disciplines. Wherever your interests are, you can find something that's going to turn you on that you'd like to do, and you are contributing real world data to real world issues. So it's a great thing.
Linda, do you have a favorite experiment?
I do. Well, I like things that are relevant and that slap people across the face, that they're so counterintuitive. And this is an experiment on contagion. And it requires the student to bring in friends and family. Okay, and you have 12 clear glasses. 11 of them are half filled with water, and one of them is filled with a clear reagent. Okay, half filled with that. And they're supposed to pretend that they're at a party, and they meet 3 people at that party, and they exchange beverages with 3 people. And they do that by pouring one glass into the other so it's mixed up, and then half. Okay, and then they go meet these 3 people. And at the end, you ask these students, if they think that they were infected. Well, there was only one glass with it, and we were 12, and we only had, probably not many people are infected. Usually, then when you add the reagent to the water, you find that almost all of them were infected. And it really brings home contagion to students like they've never thought of it before, how really impactful contagion can be.
And you came up with this?
Yeah.
Wow. I have heard this is used in sexual transmission,
Yes.
education
Yeah.
about sexually transmitted diseases.
And it can be in so many things, from, colds in the classroom to, of course, STDs, but just about anything with contagion.
Yes, that's
Okay.
Actually, I have to say I did use it in a meditation class too, talking just about love, just being kind to somebody.
Yeah.
And if there's a little expression of kindness, how that spreads.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
I use the exact same
great.
cups and reagent and
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what was your other question?
Well, any advice you might have for today's student?
I sound so pessimistic when I look at the future, and I think, can we ever bring enough people together to do the things that are needed to do to keep us from completely destroying our planet? And sometimes I'm more optimistic than others about that. It's really hard. There are so many educational options for people today, and the future educationally is very uncertain. Society is changing at such a rapid pace. Technology is changing. Look at all the jobs that we have today that didn't exist 10 years ago, or that we couldn't even think would exist.
Yeah.
And so we keep talking about, as educators, that we need to teach our students to learn how to learn. That's why I like a really broad education that exposes you to so many different things that you can bring to the table when you have to seriously think about something. And I guess learning to learn and learning to enjoy learning. I love to play in my mind. Yeah, I remember as a young woman in college one day suddenly realizing, wow, I could have a good time with just myself in my mind, thinking about ideas, things like that. So learning to appreciate their own minds and learning to learn and enjoying what they're doing.
Very similar to my recommendation. My recommendation comes out from the fact that we see in everyday life that people don't think critically enough. Almost everything that's happening is lack of critical thinking skills. That goes back to our elections, to almost everything I see. The disinterest in science or the lack of understanding science. So my recommendation is, when you take a course, no matter what its subject it is, and you have a chance to interact with your instructor, says, I would like to stress critical thinking skills. Can you give me some assignments that will enhance, that it will strengthen my critical thinking skills? Because it is not automatic. You can look into many college courses, and instructors assume that they're teaching critical thinking skills, but they don't. And I think an effort needs to be made to do that. And some colleges actually have critical thinking development courses. But overall, I think that people need to develop them on their own. And why not ask your college teacher to help you with the development?
To be clear, could you define critical thinking in your mind?
An oversimplification is to simply be critical, to simply don't take everything don't be too accepting of everything that you hear. Okay? Mm-hmm. Because right now, a major thing that's going on in our country is
inundated with false.
Yeah, especially about things like anti-vaxxers. I mean, I have that one. Yes.
Looking at it on
Yes,
our way
yes.
here. Can you share that?
Well, there is an online course that if your instructor doesn't offer this, there's an free online course that's called Calling Bullshit, and you just Google it, and the whole course is there for you to take online for free. And unfortunately, it's a little bit into mathematical and statistics, and that's not necessarily always an important component of critical thinking. You asked how to define critical thinking. It's basically to question things, don't take everything at face value. If you read something, find out who is writing it. If it's an organization that has a political bias, consider that and maybe not accept their advice. For example, if I see an article in a journal that I'm not familiar with, but I like the context, I simply don't accept it because it plays along my strength or my interests. I go and find out what's the political orientation of this particular magazine, and if it's either too far to the left or too far to the right, I will not accept it as. And I do the same thing. I'm very active in Facebook posting. I will not blindly post things, and I will also not repost things, even though when you read something that sounds, that sounds really good. I want to make, especially if it sounds too good. Yeah. And so I think that if you could strengthen critical thinking skills in our population, and what's the best is college students. I think that would be very, very beneficial to our society.
For me, critical thinking is just being skeptical. Not that you have to be a cynic, but, does that sound right? When people make outrageous claims, demanding proof, is this true? And how do I determine if it's true?
Yeah,
But
I think
just being skeptical.
a little bit skeptical. And then I think that that can also help create more conversations rather than just, one-sided arguments and not listening to each other. If we can actually learn how to debate and learn how to have conversation and hear another side and be skeptical, but also be articulate and understand why we're thinking the way we think.
And when you do that, you're forcing other people to start thinking about their thinking too. Why do you believe that? And well, I just do. Or was there some definite thing that you could point to?
That you personally had and owned and shared.
Right, you can you can teach critical thinking just by being skeptical with other people and forcing them to be skeptical too. Yeah.
Peter and Linda, thank you so much for joining us here at the Big Picture Podcast.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been really
It was a fun discussion.
Yeah.
Now, trying to edit this down to something that's a comprehensive.
Yes, you have my sympathies there. Okay. So, can I get you a beer or something to celebrate?
Our theme music by Zach Jeffrey. Musical flourishes by John Andrew. Our great thanks to Peter and Linda Jeschofnig, professors, founders of Hands-On Lab, colleagues, friends, treasures to the world. Production assistance from Greg Simmons and CPro Music. For show notes and more, please visit conceptualscience.com. A note of appreciation to all instructors using Conceptual Academy. Thank you for your support. And to the hardworking student, our thanks to you as well for your learning efforts, which we see as the path to making this world a better place. There's a bigger picture. That's good chemistry. Good chemistry to you.